Kay continued. But the next moment the exhilarating gush of young life shot through their veins. They were now in the happy prime of youth. Age, with its miserable train of cares and sorrows and diseases, was remembered only as the trouble of a dream, from which they had joyously awoke. The fresh gloss of the soul, so early lost, without the world's successive scenes, had but a gallery of faded pictures against through its enchantment over all their prospects. They felt like new created beings and in new created universe. We're young, they cried exultingly. Youth, like the extremity of age, had effaced the strongly marked characteristics of the middle life, and mutually assimilated them all. They were a group of merry youngsters, almost maddened with the exuberant frolicness of their years. The most singular effect of their gaiety was an impulse to mock the infirmity and decrepitude of which they had been lately the victims. They laughed loudly at their old-fashioned attire and the wide-skirted coats and flapped waistcoats of the young men, and the ancient cap and the gown of the blooming girl. One limped across the floor like a gouty grandfather. One set a pair of spectacles astride his nose and pretended to pore over the black-letter pages of the Book of Magic. A third seated himself in the armchair and strove to imitate the venerable dignity of Dr. H. Then all shouted mirthfully and leaped about the room. The widow Wycherley, if so fresh a damsel could be called a widow, tipped up to the doctor's chair, and with a mischievous merchant in her rosy face. "Doctor, you dear old soul," she cried, "get up and dance with me." And the four young people laughed louder than ever to think what a queer figure the poor old doctor would cut. "Pray excuse me," answered the doctor quietly. "I'm quite old and rheumatic, and my dancing days are over long ago. But either of these gay young gentlemen would be gladly so pretty of a partner." "Dance with me, Clara," cried Colonel Killigrew. "No, no, I will be her partner," shouted Mr. G. "She promised me her hand 50 years ago," exclaimed Mr. Medbourne. They all gathered around her. One caught both her hands in his passion grip. Another threw his arm about her waist. The third buried his hand along the glossy curls that clustered beneath the widow's cap. Blushing, panting, struggling, chiding, laughing, her warm breath fanning each of their faces by turns, she strove to disengage herself, yet remain in their triple embrace. Never was there a livelier picture of youthful rivalship between bewitching beauty for the prize. Yet a strange deception, owing the duskiness of the chamber, the antique dresses which they still wore. The tall mirror is said to have reflected the figures of 3 old, gray, withered grandshires, ridiculously contending for the skinny ugliness of a shriveled grandam. But they were young, their burning passions proved them so. Inflamed to madness by the conquery of the girl-widow, who neither granted nor quite withheld her favors, the 3 rivals began to interchange threatening glances. Still keeping hold of their fair prize, they grappled fiercely at one another's throats, as they struggled to and fro. The table was overturned, and the vase dashed into 1,000 fragments. The precious water of youth flowed in a bright stream across the floor, moistening the wings of a butterfly, which, grown in the decline of summer, had alighted there to die. The insect fluttered lightly through the chamber and settled on the snowy head of Dr. Heidegger. "Come, gentlemen, come," Madame Wycherley exclaimed. The doctor, "I really must protest against this riot." They stood and shivered, for it seems as if grey time were calling them back from their sunny youth, far down the chill and darksome vale of years. They looked at old Dr. H., who sat in his carved armchair holding the rose half a century, which he'd rescued from among the fragments of the shattered vase. At the motion of his hand, the 4 rioters resumed their seats, the more readily because their violent excursions had wearied them, youthful though they were. "My poor Sylvia's rose," ejaculated Dr. Heidegger, holding it in the light of the sunset clouds. "It appears to be faded again." And so it was. Even while the party were looking at it, the flower continued to shrivel up till it became dry and fragile as when the doctor first threw it into the vase. He shook off the few drops of moisture which clung to its petals. "I love it as well, thus as its dewy freshness," he observed, pressing the withered rose to his lips. While he spoke, the butterfly fluttered down from the doctor's snowy head and fell upon the floor. His guests shivered again. A strange chillness, whether the body or spirit they could not tell, was creeping gradually over them all. They gazed at one another and fancied that each fleeting moment snatched away a charm and left a deepening furrow where no one had been before. Was it an illusion? Had the changes of a lifetime been crowded into so brief a space, and were they now 4 aged people sitting with their old friend Dr. Heidegger? Are we grown old again so soon? They cried dolefully. In truth they had. The water of youth possessed merely a virtue of transient than of wine. The delirium which it created effervesced away. Yes, they were old again. With a shuddering impulse that showed her a woman still, the widow clasped her skinny hands before her face and wished that the coffin lid were over it, since it could no longer be beautiful. Yes, friends, ye are old again, said Dr. Heidegger, and lo, the water of youth is all lavished on the ground. Well, I bemoan it not, for if the fountain gushed at my very doorstep, I would not stoop to bathe my lips in it. No, though its delirium were for years instead of moments. Such is the lesson ye have taught me. But the doctor's 4 friends had taught no lesson to themselves. They resolved forthwith to make a pilgrimage to Florida, and quaff at the morning, noon, and night from the fountain of youth.